Due Process, recipient of 6 Mid-Atlantic Emmy Awards.
We've gotten samples on the streets of New Jersey as high as 95%.
Here in Newark?
Yes, in Essex County.
95%?
95%.
Can't that kill you?
Certainly it could.
Heroin, now bigger than ever and purer than ever. So this man says that the war on drugs has never been more crucial. He's the DEA's general here in New Jersey, but is his war a losing battle? That's the question at the heart of this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding is provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual.
It's been more than 30 years since this country declared war on drugs, and 3 decades later, not even its most enthusiastic warriors would claim that the victory has been won. But is it a losing battle, or does it still make sense? I'm Raymond Brown, and we'll put that question to a drug treatment expert, an advocate of drug law reform, and a general in that war on drugs. But first, here's Sandy King with a view from the battleground.
Raymond, the experts say the problem is everywhere, in virtually every town, every school. We're no longer surprised when we read that another suburban kid has overdosed on heroin. But the battleground is still where the war on drugs began, where the devastation has been greatest, the population nearly decimated by addiction, AIDS, and countless arrests. So when the head of the Drug Enforcement Administration in New Jersey took us out to the front lines to talk about the traffic in drugs, the setting was the streets of Newark.
Wow. Shh. All right. Everybody just act cool. Nadine, come on, pick up the drugs.
Heroin. In Drugstore Cowboy, we saw it like it was in the 70s.
Right-wingers will use drug hysteria
In William Burroughs, we read about heroin in the 50s.
to set up an international police apparatus.
It is not a new problem. Even the so-called war on drugs has been around for 30 years.
In March 1973, Richard Nixon authorized the formation of a new law enforcement super agency to fight drugs, the Drug Enforcement Administration. The DEA would combine the narcotics agents from Customs with those from the BNDD as well as other agencies to make a single entity responsible for drug enforcement.
But there's been no victory in this war.
It's a Chinese rifle. This is obviously what it is it's the tools of the drug trade.
And over the decades, the problems moved from the hardcore to the home front. Witness still another film in which the prep school junkie is the daughter of the U.S. drug czar, who comes to learn just what he is up against.
You are not going anywhere, young lady. You stay right there.
And the challenge is not news to the DEA's man in New Jersey.
How's everybody doing?
But Mike Pasterchick continues to insist it's a war that can be won. And he prefers to point to the good news from the battlefront.
There he is, Mr. Untouchable. These are a lot of successes that DEA has had over the last 30 years.
Though even he concedes that the war at times can seem unwinnable, starting at street level.
Street sales of small amounts of drugs, they may be out within a few days. So we can certainly arrest people on these street corners, but they're sometimes replaced very quickly.
And though the big drug smuggling smugglers and drug suppliers remain the top priority.
This communication center is operated from 8 in the morning till midnight.
Small-time street deals are a target still, and for that, he makes no apology.
We still need to send that message to them that they can't operate with impunity out there.
So the DEA chief took us out to the streets to show us, he said, how the heroin market operates on the streets of New Jersey cities like Newark.
This will be a typical street operation in Newark. We're basically on the left-hand side of the street. You'll see scouts, lookouts. People will pull up, talk, tell them how much heroin they would, very quick transactions.
In stop after stop, in housing project courtyards on inner city streets, we saw young men who may or may not have been buying or selling drugs. We have no way to know, though the DEA's man had no doubt.
And that was basically what looked to be a drug transaction going around right next to the playground. And again, this complex is known for the sale of heroin.
And just like the drug world we see in the movie Traffic, the customers, Mike Pasterchick says, come in all colors and all classes.
You've got kids coming from the suburbs, going into the cities, picking up 10 or 50 bags of heroin, going back, they sell a percentage of it, and they keep some for themselves, they keep some for their friends, they sell some to their friends. It's not only urban kids, it's young people under the age of 26. It's not just an urban problem. What it is it's in everyone's community, and if it's not, it's coming to your community.
And according to Pasterchick, it's coming in more powerful form than ever before. Price is down and quality is up, frighteningly up.
In New Jersey, we have samples as high as 95% pure on the streets of New Jersey. You can't get any better heroin in the world. You can't get better heroin coming out of a lab in Southeast Asia or Southwest Asia or South America.
Still, if there is always another supplier on the way, another dealer down the street, just what is the point of this war?
People that say that the drug business isn't dangerous and they're not out to hurt people. These are what people, I go to work with a pen every day, the drug dealers go to work with guns like this every day.
But even if it is a war worth fighting, is it a war that can be won, given both the supply and the demand? You say you do make a difference.
Absolutely, we make a difference every day, whether it's one person at a time or dismantling entire drug organizations from the Northeast to Colombia and throughout the world.
So you sleep well at night?
Yes, I do.
But the DEA position is based on another assumption, that the way to counteract and control the drug problem is with police action, interdiction, arrests, imprisonment. Here in New Jersey, it's the war on drugs that has filled our prisons. But are we closer now to a drug-free society, an end to drug traffic, than when the war on drugs began? And if the answer is no, the question is, could there be a better way?
And when we come back, we will take on that question. We'll have more from the DEA and Mike Pasterchick, and we'll get some contrasting views from a longtime leader in drug treatment in New Jersey and from a national leader in the fight to liberalize drug laws.
Are we winning the war on drugs? Well, it was just an article in the paper saying that marijuana is on the uprise.
I think it's all mostly politics. I think it's mostly shallow statements about getting out there and winning the war on drugs when nothing's really happening.
I think the National Guard needs to come in and just wipe it out completely.
They seem to be locking up a lot of people for sort of low-level drug charges. They're not providing treatment for people.
I don't know. Nothing seems to be happening as far as the war on drugs go.
Well, my husband's son is a police officer who deals with that every day, and it's an endless battle that just goes on and on.
Just from a college student's perspective, yeah, we're definitely losing. I'm sorry to say, but yeah.
So what do we do about the war on drugs? Do we step up the battle? Do we give up the fight? Is there really a better way? For some very different answers, we turn to Mike Pasterchick, the DEA's man in charge of New Jersey, the special agent we met in Sandy's tape piece. To Eric Sterling, president of the Washington-based Criminal Justice Policy Foundation, who says it's time to call a ceasefire in the war on drugs. And in Newark, to Dave Kerr, longtime president of Integrity House, New Jersey's oldest and largest residential drug treatment program. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you for having us.
Welcome. Eric, let me start with you. You've been around a long time. In fact, your work with the Congress was at sort of the beginning phases of the war on drugs. Do you think it's a losing battle? Do you think there's an alternative?
What we saw in this piece is we have lost. When you see data that says that heroin is pure at the 95%, that tells us we've lost. The first hearing I ever set up, in 1980, we were talking about heroin purity being 5% as the national average. It's 8 times greater. It's grown 800%. Heroin purity is like cell phones. It's like video cassette recorders. These are among the most successful industries, and that's because prohibition doesn't work.
Mike, I'm assuming that you respond differently to the very same statistic about the purity of heroin.
Yeah, certainly. With this blueprint, we have these high purities of heroin. If it wasn't for the drug war, we wouldn't know that these high purities of heroin were out there. We do sampling across the nation called the Domestic Monitoring Program. We see that there's high purities of heroin in the state of New Jersey, as compared to the rest of the country. So what do? With that scientific data, we take it and we formulate a plan. So if there wasn't this drug war, we wouldn't even know these kids could be dying of heroin, high purities of heroin. But more importantly, I've taken that scientific data and used it as a blueprint, a roadmap where I need to take my enforcement efforts, but even more specifically, my demand reduction efforts. I mean, we're doing wonderful things with the seizures of heroin in the state. We've seized over 600% more heroin in the last 5 years. Our arrests are up. We've had a banner year this year. We seized over $14 million. But last week, on October 14th, we partnered for the last 9 months with New Jersey Prevention Network and with the State of New Jersey Department of Human Services to make a video that hopefully is going to be in every school throughout this state.
Let me bring Eric back in, because Eric, it seems as though Mike is saying the very statistic, the 90% purity, is a sign of good intelligence and hence effectiveness.
That's ridiculous. You know, when he says the heroin couldn't be pure, that's failure. The test of what DEA is trying to do is to drive down the purity. That's what every head of DEA ever told Congress: lower the purity. The fact is, this is a complete failure. The statistics that Mike tells us about all the seizures and so forth, that's again evidence of failure, how big the problem has begun. When he talks about science, science tells us that regulation is what we use to protect public safety. We regulate all the foods we eat, all the drugs in the drugstores. The only things we don't regulate is the heroin that we give the organized crime the responsibility of selling.
Okay. Before we come back to your ideas about regulation and Mike's response, Dave, let me come to you. You've been in the process of treating people for many, many years. Have you seen a rise in treatment of this 90% purity in heroin? And if so, is that a factor in treatment, or are there others that are more important?
Well, first, it's difficult to talk about an issue that's called a war on drugs when it automatically has a legal and criminal justice connotation. You know, I'm working with people that need to have their lives reclaimed. We have a society that tends to throw them away, put them in jail, and even in some cases stop the parole process. So
Dave, let me just interrupt you, because you've been a guest with us in the past, and my recollection is that you were not favoring decriminalization. Have you begun to shift or rethink your position, or have I mishearing you?
No, I think that the drug courts are a good example of how law enforcement and criminal justice system can work. The Commissioner, Devin Brown, has some wonderful programs inside the prison. We're trying to connect them to the outside. The new parole chief, Judge D'Amico, also has some excellent ideas on how to connect the...
So is it fair to say that you see law enforcement then as a lever to enforce or to require or to provide more treatment more widely?
Yes, you have to have that leverage, because most drug addicts really don't have... They want to get off drugs, but they don't have the inertia or whatever to make it, and you have to give them a little nudge
So on balance, would that suggest that you think the war on drugs is successful at driving more people into treatment and therefore a good thing, or would you rethink it as Eric has suggested?
No, I think that certainly the 70% purity in Newark is not a great sign, but I think the fact that we've all started to come together and realize drug addiction needs to be treated in a way that encompasses law enforcement as well as support agencies. And in Newark, we set up a group called the Bridge to Recovery, which is a consortium of about 300 people and 60 agencies, and we're all here to meet once a month to try to figure this out.
Let me jump in here. I want to come back to Eric. Then you talked about regulation. Is the kind of amalgam of efforts that involves the hammer of law enforcement, but increasingly courts that are receptive to at least some treatment aspects, something that moves in a direction you're interested in, or is that not regulation in the way you see it?
It's not regulation the way I see it, but you have to be careful between mixing up the problem of drug users and their addiction and the crimes that they commit. People commit crimes should go to jail. People who use drugs shouldn't go to jail. But more importantly, when you talk about the distribution and the international traffic, that's clearly what's out of control here. That's the violence. Mike is right. When he holds up a gun, you can't have a prohibited illegal drug business. This, remember, heroin, a pure gram is worth $2,000. It's like 20 times to 200 times more valuable than pure gold. Well, people are going to kill for that.
Well, Mike, this can't be the first time you've heard the argument that it's the prohibition that creates the illegal market that you then have to deal with in terms of enforcement. How do you respond to that?
Well, quite honestly, I mean, I think our enforcement efforts are doing a great job. I mean, and we've seized more heroin than we ever had before.
But Eric says that higher seizures mean failure at interdiction. Is that accurate or not in your view?
I find them to be successes at interdiction. But what we've really done in DEA also is we've also tried to, in addition to, we target drug traffickers, not drug users. We target drug traffickers around the world. We work investigations here in New Jersey to touch upon Colombia and the Middle East, so all over the world. So it's a misnomer to think that we're targeting drug users.
Mike, this is what DEA always says, and it's gotten worse and worse and worse. How can you say you're making success if you got an average purity of 70% in the streets of Newark with heroin, when it was 5% national average in 1981? How can you say it's success?
Well, it's success by our seizures are up over 617%.
That just means there's more of it. The more dope there is, the more your seizures have to go up.
No, I mean, when you talk about the drug war, I'll tell you about successes. There's 400,000 fewer teenagers using drugs since 2001. Current marijuana usage dropped by 11%. Ecstasy's been slashed in half. Can I talk about ecstasy for a second, right?
Is the evidence you're talking about are statistics that are accepted?
Absolutely, absolutely. But ecstasy uses, we had, and the same, I want this parallel with heroin the same as ecstasy. Ecstasy was a big problem here in this state and in the clubs and everything. And since 2001, it's been slashed in half. We went out and did videos. We educated the public. We educated our young people who are smart young people. And when you go out, we do a two-prong approach. We have enforcement as well as education and prevention. And the same thing we're doing with heroin. We're educating the public. That's why I'm on shows like this. I'm talking to parents. I'm talking to young people. We just produced a video that we put out October 14th to educate everyone in the schools.
Let me get Dave back in. Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a problem with what Eric said. I think we're at a point where we are working together with law enforcement and treatment and criminal justice and judges, but you can't say, well, if the drug addict breaks the law, put him in jail. If he's just a user, then treat him, because the drug addict is sells drugs, uses drugs. And the problem is way too complicated to make that kind of statement.
But I think Eric says that's because it's illegal. So if you took the illegality out of it, wouldn't that then let you separate them more easily?
No, because you still have drug addicts that need treatment, and it's not a matter of whether it's legal or illegal. It's a matter of they need treatment, and we need to work together.
Of course they need treatment, but we underfund treatment. We've underfunded it for 30 years. And, DEA's budget was $200-some million when I started working. Now it's $1.2 billion. Almost all the money we spend is on enforcement. When you look at the government's data, treatment is hardly increased at all, except in the private sector. Publicly funded treatment is hardly increased. And drug use among teenagers has gone up steadily, according to the PRIDE survey. I mean, I don't know where Mike gets his data, but this is from the National Drug Intelligence Center.
Well, Dave, you're in treatment. Dave, you're in treatment. Is there a shortage of beds or facilities in New Jersey?
Yeah, there is a shortage. There's a waiting list, but we have to look at if we're going to win this war, use the metaphor. We have to look at what works. We can't always yell back and forth at each other and what's working.
Amen.
What really is working now is when people come together and they start really looking at the problem as one problem, one person, one problem. And they have the vocational agencies, the medical agencies, the treatment agencies all talking together, the judges, the drug courts, all around one person's need. I mean, we have DIFUS mothers that are addicted and still having children, and there's no real kind of state encouragement or mandate, rather, for them to get treatment. They pretty much can decide what they want to do, and they keep having babies who are addicted.
Let me ask a question, Dave, to all of you. What would mark a benchmark at which we would either declare we've successfully prosecuted the war on drugs and it's now a marginal question, or we concede that we can't go this way and we have to move to something else? Where is there a benchmark we could all agree on?
If I could just give that. One of our problems is we don't have a real good database of information. For example, in demand side, we've been trying in Newark to create a database. We have a database called WEBIS, and we've linked that with the state database called NJ-SAMS.
All right, so there's a lack of data. Eric, let me ask this.
We need the data.
Which you focused on earlier. What would you see as a benchmark, which you think you could clearly hold up to say it's failed? And then I'll ask Mike about it.
Okay, number one, the death rate should go down. The death rate has gone up steadily since 1979. The death rate was 3.5 per 100,000. Now it's 7.2 per 100,000. The number dead from illegal drugs
is that from heroin or is that from?
This is from all the illegal drugs that DEA goes after. Okay. The number of dead has more than tripled.
What?
High school. I mean, that's okay. Death rate number one. Hospital emergency rooms are up 60% from illegal drug use since 1990. High school kids, we've been asking them since 1973, how easy is it for you to get drugs? They report at record levels that the drugs are easy to get.
Right, let me ask Mike to respond to the three health-related criteria you've articulated.
Yeah, sure. Eric said death rate and emergency room rates are up, and that's probably accurate. My question, I guess, would be to Eric is if drugs were legalized or the enforcement efforts and the demand reduction and prevention efforts that are in place weren't there, what would those rates be?
Good question, Eric.
Well, enforcement and demand reduction don't necessarily go together. That's what DEA insists. If drugs are bad, he said we can educate kids about drugs and that we can convince them not to use it. The prohibition exaggerations, the exaggerations that marijuana is as dangerous as heroin, or that marijuana is funding international terrorism and led to the bombing of the World Trade Center, is so absurd no one believes it.
Is there any linkage at all between the illegal trade in drugs and terrorism?
In Colombia, the FARC finances itself. That's about a penny out of every dollar spent on cocaine in the United States. So probably it's about the same as buying gas.
Would that continue if we were regulating it rather than treating it criminally?
No, none of that would go to finance terrorism.
I know you want to respond to that.
Sure, and I don't want to get into an in-depth conversation about terrorism, but about half of the terrorist organizations in the world use drug trafficking as a means to gain income. They don't have cake sales.
DEA is the only organization that says that.
They don't have bake
Nobody
sales.
believes that.
So we have a real difference of opinion on a critical point. Let me ask you this, Eric. We've just finished a campaign season where the issue of drug policy didn't get discussed except in one conversation of the many public debates. Does that mean there's a less public concern, or the public has just moved to other priorities?
I think that the candidates didn't want to touch it. I mean, for the Bush administration, there would be the failure of the 4 years that they were the president. They were the reorientation of resources from anti-drug activity to terrorism. I don't think that Senator Kerry saw that there was any advantage for him to sort of bring up the issue, so that's why.
Mike, does the public care less now than it did 10 or 20 years ago about the issue of drug use?
I don't think they care any less, the public. I mean, it's certainly, when kids die from drug abuse and drug overdoses, they certainly care, especially when they're in their families or their neighbors. And drug abuse touches everyone in this nation. So I don't think they care any less than they did. It might not be on the front pages, but we're still very much involved in a war.
We're near the end. I need to be unfair and ask you each a one-word answer. 20 years from now, if we're all around, will we come back here and still be talking about the war on drugs? Dave?
Yes, we will.
Yes, we will.
And I'll come back here, and hopefully we'll be talking about our successes on the war on drugs.
So
He will be.
So it sounds like we all agree on one unfortunate fact, which is that the war will still be going on long into the future.
We can never give up this fight. We must fight every day, Ray.
Eric?
It's time to recognize we need a smarter strategy to protect public health and safety than the failed one we followed.
Given your prediction, sounds like we'll be here again, but that's it for this edition of Due Process. We'll be back next week with another cutting-edge issue of law and justice, the kind of TV you're not likely to find elsewhere. So we hope you'll join us again. Till then, for Sandy King and all of us here at Due Process, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
In New Jersey, we have samples as high as 95% pure on the streets of Jersey. You can't get any better heroin in the world. You can't get better heroin coming out of a lab in Southeast Asia, or Southwest Asia, or South America. That's pure. I mean, that's 95% pure heroin. So what happens is...
It's not good for the kid who buys it and shoots it up.
It's not good for anyone who buys it and shoots it, especially our youth. But just to put it in perspective for you, when I started this job 25 years ago, heroin percentages on the streets were an average of 2, 3, or 4%.
2 to 4%.
2 to 4%.
And now you're saying
25 years.
95% on the streets of Newark.
Well, we've gotten samples as high as 95%. Our average here, which is the highest in the nation, is up over 70%.
70.
That's right. So going from 2, 3, 4% in the 70s when I started this job to now, it's up to over 70% 25 years later.
Major funding for Due Process was made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding was provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual,